But you know, I have a solution to this. Abolish this whole scene entirely. It doesn't do anything but hurt Sanji's character.
What?
Sanji knows that even if Luffy knew the whole situation with Zeph, he would try to find a way to save him. Luffy is selfish. This is most apparent when he frees many bloodthirsty pirates from Impel Down just to save his brother. So while the circumstances call for Sanji to act this way in this scene, it only serves the purpose of undermining his character, and would have better off been left out.
Kukji, Lanji, Wanji, Rape-ji? No matter what G you san, it seems at the very least, Simpji is unanimous. Or is it? I think I should preface this video with a heavy amount of transparency. I am what some may consider a Sanji tard, a fellow Sanji simp, whatever you want to call me. Sanji is my favorite character amongst the plethora of phenomenal characters that encompass the world of One Piece. Which means, inevitably, I might be biased in my interpretation of this character. I could say I'm going to be as objective as possible when examining this subject, but I think that just comes off as a bit disingenuous. So here's what I'll say instead. I'll make my points, and you can decide if they are valid or not. My interpretations of this story are just that, interpretations. We don't know 100% what an author is intending to convey through a scene or character. Hell, sometimes the author doesn't even know his or herself what they are trying to convey. That's what makes media so cool. All the different conclusions people can come to from the same series, scene, character, or whatever. But honestly, while I will still be trying to come at the simp criticism of this character as soundly as I can, consider this video my excuse to also make a pseudo-analysis of my favorite character from my favorite work of fiction. Actually, to be even more accurate, consider this a love letter to my man, Vinsmoke Sanji. So let's just ease into the daunting question for now. Is Sanji a simp? To answer this question in the most big-brained, megamind way, let's do a thorough examination of the character himself before jumping straight to the answer. I think conceptually, Sanji is one of the coolest characters I have ever seen in any form of media. He is first and foremost a cook, and a phenomenal one at that, but he is also a phenomenal fighter. Yet he doesn't allow his fighting to distract or deter from his main passion as a chef. And he abides by this conceptual idea so much so that he even refuses to use his arms to strike his opponents. He will not allow his hands to be at risk, because they represent his passion. Without hands, he can't cook. But even more so than that, his passion represents his ultimate dream, the All Blue, the miracle sea that is said to have a congregation of fish from all four hemispheres of the One Piece world. Without his hands, he loses his ability to cook. And without his ability to cook, he loses his dream. I would argue Sanji's hands are symbolic in the same vein as Luffy's straw hat, or Katakuri's scarf, because each one of these symbolic things represents a part of these people that have shaped their current identity, and this is why Oda chooses exploding cuffs to be the visual representation of Sanji's eventual deadlock in his journey. Another more minor symbolic touch Oda gave to this character is the cigarettes he ritualistically smokes. While the surface level acknowledgement of this character trait would be to add to the badass points of his all-around design, I think it also speaks a little on his past visually. Cigarettes are known to be substances that reduce appetite, and with what we know about Sanji's past, it is apparent that this chain smoking probably has something to do with his death that he faced at the hands of starvation. Yet he was saved from this fate by Zeph, the man Sanji took so much from, his father figure, the one who raised him into being the person he is today. He owes Zeph a great deal. Or, at least, that's what Sanji himself believes. And he believes it so much so that he pushes himself to resist that romantic urge to venture out to achieve his own personal dream. Instead, he has devoted his adolescent life to help make Zeph's dream a reality. And done that he already has by the time the Straw Hats emerge on that floating restaurant. Yet still, Sanji persists with his current role, staying by his savior's side as sous chef. Has Sanji simply grown complacent walking behind his father's footsteps? No. As a matter of fact, he never lost that irresistible urge to set out and chase what he truly wants for himself. Yet he buried that deep within himself. Even when it seems like he's done enough, he asks for his life to be taken in exchange for Zeph's. Because to Sanji, what he did to that man warrants a lifelong debt. To Sanji, he crushed someone's dream. Because Zeph's dream was the same as Sanji's once was, after all. So the only worthy remorse he could find within himself was to do something equally as painful to himself. Bury his own dream, and live for the new dream of the one that allowed his own dream to remain. Yet this foolhardy kindness is misplaced. Sanji doesn't understand that what would make Zeph most happy now is seeing Sanji the way he is when he talks about his dream, because just like Sanji had eventually come to see Zeph as a father, Zeph felt the same connection in seeing Sanji as a son. Yet Sanji deludes himself enough to not face this reality head on, because his own self-perception is of a man not worthy of any type of respect, care, or love, because to himself, he has only ever been a dream crusher, and before that, first and foremost, a failure. Sanji once had a biological father, as a matter of fact, a whole biological family. The years he spent being a prince, son of the great king of the German kingdom, were anything but positive ones. He was weaker, less resilient, more fearful, and, worst of all, more kind than any of his other siblings. He was a regular human boy, something he was always supposed to be. Yet Judge had rejected that humanity already long ago, seeing the features and characteristics of a son that had not ascended into being something beyond human disgusted him, because it reminded him of himself, his own humanity. The thing that he saw as being the detriment to his kingdom, the reason why the German lost control of the North Blue. They became weak, and abandoning that human conscience was the path to glory from Judge's perspective. Why he believes this to be the case? Well, there's really no answer, and I assume there never will be. But something I can answer is how this affects his relationship with Sanji. If someone embodies everything you have come to despise, tell me, how do you think you would look at that someone? Sanji is a product of his brother's constant torment, but even worse than that, a product of his father's contempt. When it is apparent that he will never become the man Judge expects him to be, he is locked away, forgotten. A fitting circumstance for a lifelong failure. Yet, Sanji never did stray away from his human kindness even after all the trauma, because there was always a thin beam of light that emerged every so often in all the darkness. That light being the conversations he would have with his sickly yet kind mother, and the bandages to his wounds that his sister would provide. So now you see, this absurd love for women does not have its deepest roots in the domain of perversion, nor even in the chivalry he acquired from the teachings of Zeph, but actually in the only good memories he has of his distant past, all shared with the opposite gender. Sanji has a very romantic view of all women due to the culmination of his past experiences, which manifest outwardly in his absurd chivalrous nature. His perversion is, shockingly I know, merely secondary, yet still an integral part of his character. As Mr. Morge points out in one of his latest videos on the topic of Sanji, one of the most beloved things about the character is how cool and suave he is in every circumstance, until he sees a cute girl in his vicinity and that epic persona all falls apart. This dichotomy is a character trait that defines Sanji all throughout pre-timeskip, and the problem Mr. Morge has with Sanji now post-timeskip is that while this perverted gag is still present, we haven't really gotten enough cool or good moments to contrast from Sanji's comedy relief side, and I understand this take. Yet I believe it disregards the wonderful progression of a simple dichotomous gag turned into a grave detriment that sets up for one of the greatest character arcs in the entire series. An arc that begins with a new running trend of Sanji being led by a woman's tears. In Punk Hazard, Sanji heard the sound of Tashiki's tears falling. Those tears led him to the Marines which he subsequently saved. A seemingly contradictory action for a pirate, but it narratively pays off in the fact that those same Marines were able to help the children that the Straw Hats wanted to save. A minor plot thread this one is, sure, but the next time these tears come into play, it's from a character with significant arc importance. Sanji buys into Viola's tears, and while we are led to believe at first it's simply because he's allowing his dick to do the thinking, we get the quote that reveals it's a little bit more than just that. Sanji will never doubt a woman's tears. Well, sounds a little, I don't know, simpy perhaps? Yet, despite the unrealistic nature of this comment, it was its very utterance that compelled Viola to change sides and put her faith in the Straw Hats, allowing the crew to gain a valuable asset to their cause. It's almost like Oda is trying to make a statement here. Perhaps is it that simps actually rule? I mean, it was also Sanji who stated to Chopper that a man forgives a woman's lies. This surely is a statement more than anything else, right? Is Oda for simp army? No, obviously not. Because this is where context comes into play, my friends. Before Robin walked away from these two, we had all the reasons to believe that she had strayed to the path of a traitorous rogue, or more precisely, had always been just that, and always will be. But this quote that Sanji gives right after Robin walks away is more so than anything else a look through the lens of the opposite perspective. Robin has never actually been a traitor, because she's lying. It's a blanket statement. This quote was never meant to be taken at face value. You could argue that an unbecoming viewer might just haphazardly take this quote-unquote advice literally, but I would counter that by saying it is the responsibility of the viewer to translate meaning from a story from their own unique perspective, and take the information they garnered from that piece of media and apply it wisely in the real world. When we see a villain commit a deplorable act in fiction, do we typically feel the need to recreate it? No. We are to some degree offended by it. So we tell ourselves, I know what that looks like now, and that's something I never want to be. You could apply that same logic here. A man forgives a woman's lies? Psst, that's simp talk, bro. Would you really forgive your girl for lying about cheating on you? But again, going back to my previous point, I believe even that take is a misguided one, because it shows a lack of eye for context. Even taking the statement at face value in the context of the story, it's just as easy to come to a different conclusion that what Sanji says is not only just, but valid. If Sanji could already tell that Robin was lying, who's to say it wasn't just as easy for him to figure out the origins of those lies? And if he could tell that, then obviously he would be correct in coming to the conclusion that those lies should be forgiven. So what about the words he utters to Viola? What's your excuse there, you might be wondering? Well, while my context argument still applies here, breaking down the context of this scene is going to be a little more challenging, because to find the thematic significance of these words, we cannot simply look at the scene in a vacuum, because this was only the second time that Sanji had been led by a woman's tears. I'll never doubt a woman's tears, a quote Sanji has carried with him to this moment, in words that he proves that he still stands behind. Yet this time, the end result of those words earned him anything but an ally. When he bought into those tears, he also bought into the prospect that there was grass that would be just as green on the other side. Yet he gets to see through that window with his very own eyes how wilted that grass actually is. He was delusional. He had deluded himself into believing that he could find happiness away from his crewmates, his friends, his dream. If Sanji simply buried his dream like he had once did working at Baratier, perhaps he could find new happiness here, with pudding. Yet unlike the cooks encompassing the floating restaurant, everyone residing on this Wonderland island were nothing but enemies. It's easy to say that this is simply a rehash of an already told character arc, but that opinion is only valid under the assumption that the arc had already been concluded. Sanji did not leave Baratier having come to terms with his lack of concern for his own well-being. It was simply through a compromise that he even allowed himself to leave Zeph's side in the first place. On his new journey, he proved time and time again just how much he valued everything else over his own life. He had always been fully committed to the thought of dying for those comrades that found him. To Sanji, he has only ever been a failure. Even when he succeeds, he deludes himself into believing it's all negligible in the long run. And his mindset is warped in this way because he never did face his past. He ran away from it long ago. But now that it's caught back up with him, he chooses to run away from something else. His dream. Because his dream is not as important as the lives of all those crewmates that he has come to deeply care for. But still, even when Luffy personally comes to announce himself, why does Sanji still reject him? Is it because he doesn't trust in Luffy? But hasn't he already proven time and time again that he trusts in this man more than anyone? Well, it's not that he doesn't ultimately trust in Luffy's success, it's that Sanji doesn't even view himself as worth the risk in the first place. And Sanji foolishly abides by this idea so absurdly that he would even strike his own captain to cement his death as a Straw Hat. But even still, through all those kicks, like Sanji once had when he said a man forgives a woman's lies, Luffy breaks through Sanji's lies as well. And once the world collapsed on him after his delusions caught up, who is the only one he can run to? Well, of course, his captain. Luffy didn't choose to find Sanji after their bout, because he knows his kindness more than anyone else. The sound of a growling stomach is the only thing this man needs in order to disregard any and all circumstances. Luffy knew without a doubt Sanji would come to fulfill his role no matter what, because that's who he is. Reiju had once freed Sanji, enabling him to run away from his past, and now Luffy does the complete opposite. Instead of allowing Sanji to feel content with his reasonings as to why it is impossible for him to return to the crew, effectively allowing him to run away from his position in the Straw Hats, Luffy disregards the semantics and aims straight for the origin of all these lies, by saying the very words Sanji has needed to hear for his entire life. And Sanji, finally, puts himself in his own sights. But Sanji, even after finally letting himself express a semblance of selfishness, confides that even after all the pain and trauma that his family has caused him, he still cannot live with himself if he allowed them to die. And now it is clear, Sanji was never a failure. Sora had attempted to nurture a boy with a kind human heart in this kingdom of monsters, and after her death, it seemed that maybe her dream would only be just that. But as Reiju points out, she definitely didn't fail, because the man Sanji has become is someone that their mother would surely be proud of. Sora sacrificed her health, and even her own life to ensure that even just one of her sons would grow up to be human. When Sanji tries once again to twist this story into a catastrophic event that he caused, like with Zeph on that isolated rock, Reiju snaps him back into reality, informing him that before she died, she smiled, because she had no regrets. Her kind soul would surely live on through Sanji, and that it has. Even when faced with the woman who crushed his entire world once before, Sanji speaks nothing but admiration for the third eye that Pudding has been scorned for her entire life. And just like she once had for Sanji, Sanji returns the favor by crushing her entire world as well. And they both, having lived through trauma, delusion, realization, denial, and finally acceptance, come together once more to accomplish a task larger than life, in an effort that wasn't diluted by a web of lies, nor polluted by any plots to assassinate anyone, because they are both, first and foremost, cooks, and that's what they will always be, no matter how much they try to be something else. And finally, at the end of this long, painful, truly torturous road, Sanji gets something no simp could ever acquire. Yeah, so to answer the question in simple terms, is Sanji a simp? Well, let's just Google the definition of simp real quick. Sucka's idolizing mediocre female organ. Nope. Nuh-uh. Nada.